Okay, so a warm welcome to everyone joining us today. I'm very pleased to be presenting Thinkstep's webinar on the increasing costs of packaging compliance. My name is Howard Stimpson and I'm a Senior Manager at Thinkstep's Recycling Compliance Business Unit. I'm also joined today by my colleague James Pearson, Product Manager of EC4P, who during today's webinar will be demonstrating Thinkstep's unique web reporting tool, EC4P, Environmental Compliance for Products. For those of you that haven't heard of EC4P, well, the system's been developed to allow companies to be able to guarantee their packaging plus WEEE and batteries compliance not only across Europe but also now outside the European member states. Before we start, just to let you know that time permitting, there will be opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation by typing them into your webinar toolbox. Please just bear in mind though, we've got over 100 companies attending this webinar today. So both James and I will try to answer as many questions as time allows at the end of the presentation. Now, if there are any unanswered questions, we'll endeavour to provide our answers to the participant at an appropriate opportunity after the presentation. Also to let you know that a recording of today's webinar will also be available on our YouTube channel in the coming days. Okay, so to give you an overview of today's webinar, well, firstly, you might not have heard of our company Thinkstep before, so I'd just like to give you some information about who we are and our industry experience in managing packaging WEEE batteries compliance. Then I'll provide a short refresher of the EU Packaging Directive and in particular the compliance requirements for producers of packaging. During this discussion, I'll also show how the Packaging Directive is implemented differently between each of the 28 member states, and therefore how packaging producers must comply is also different in each country. I'll then show you how we're starting to see the costs for packaging recycling increase, taking a closer look at how recent changes in France, Germany and Italy are raising these packaging recycling costs. We'll then move on to showing you how Thinkstep's managed compliance services can identify your company's legal obligations for packaging compliance across Europe and be able to recommend suitable and cost-effective packaging recycling schemes in each member state. I'll then be able to pass you over to my colleague James, who will demonstrate how Thinkstep's web reporting tool, Environmental Compliance for Products, EC4P, is now being used by manufacturers to guarantee their packaging, plus also WEEE and batteries compliance, across all of the 28 EU member states, plus EFTA countries, so the likes of Iceland, Norway and Switzerland. And of course there should be opportunity at the end of the presentation today to be able to address any questions which have been posted into the webinar toolbox. Okay, so for those of you who have not heard of Thinkstep before, well, we're a global sustainability company employing over 250 sustainability experts across 19 countries. We serve more than 2,000 companies, and that includes 40% of the global Fortune 500. Thinkstep's Recycling Compliance Business Unit is run from the Thinkstep Compliance Limited subsidiary, and that's located in the Southwest United Kingdom, and that's headed up by my colleague, Dr. Aidan Turnbull. One of the unique aspects about Thinkstep is that we offer solutions to manage compliance for electrotechnical products across all stages of the life cycle. So our integrated materials management software and our compliance process manager software enable you to design compliant products in your PLM system. BombCheck, which you may well have heard of, enables your company to buy compliant components from your suppliers. And then finally, the EC4P, Environmental Compliance for Products platform, allows your company to then comply to end-of-life requirements for WEEE batteries and packaging, collection, recycling, reporting and producer registration. From our Thinkstep Compliance Limited office in the Southwest United Kingdom, we provide our full range of managed WEEE batteries and packaging outsourced services that ensure companies can meet their legal obligations for WEEE batteries and packaging registration, take-back, recycling and reporting. So our industry experience in the field of producer responsibility dates back to 2003. This is when we wrote the UK government guidelines for ROS and WEEE. In 2005, we launched our pan-European web-based WEEE compliance services, which was designed to assist manufacturers of professional use equipment to be able to manage their WEEE obligations for collection and recycling. In 2007, we were the first organisation in the UK to gain authorisation from the UK government to operate a licensed producer compliance scheme for WEEE. It's known as B2B WEEE scheme. And then in 2009, we launched our managed services for integrated packaging, WEEE and batteries compliance. In 2013, we launched our packaging plus WEEE and batteries compliance services for non-EU countries. And then in 2014, we developed and launched our unique web tool EC4P to allow manufacturers to gather and manage their packaging plus WEEE and batteries compliance reporting data. Okay, so let's spend a few moments just reviewing the EU Packaging Directive. Well, for those of you who don't know, the Packaging Directive's primary aim is to harmonise the management of packaging waste in EU member states. The directive applies to all packaging placed on EU member state markets, and the directive specifically includes sales, grouped and transport packaging. Under the directive, each EU member state must set up collection and return systems for packaging waste and meet minimum packaging recovery and recycling targets. Almost every EU member state places the packaging take-back, recycling and recovery obligations onto the packaging producer. And a packaging producer, well, that includes suppliers of packaging materials, packaging manufacturers and converters, fillers and users of packaging, packaging importers, and traders and distributors of packaging. So if your company is selling packaged products in an EU member state, well, your company is almost certainly likely to have exposure as a packaging producer under one of the above packaging producer definitions. Now, in each EU member state, the packaging producer must register with the packaging regulator and meet packaging recovery and recycling targets. And whilst the directive does not stipulate how EU member states must work with packaging producers to achieve these recycling and recovery targets, in reality, the producer has to join what's known as a packaging compliance scheme operating in that particular country. The producer in turn then pays a packaging recycling fee based on their calculated packaging obligation. And this takes into account the quantity of packaging that they sell, the type of packaging, and also, as we'll be exploring in today's webinar, increasingly how easy this packaging is to actually recycle. The directive also specifies that packaging must comply with essential requirements concerning substance restrictions, the use of materials which allow packaging reuse and recovery, and it provides provision for packaging materials identification marking. So as you probably gathered, the Packaging Directive really presents a number of challenges for manufacturers who firstly need to understand their legal obligations under the packaging regulations in each member state and to be able to then implement packaging producer compliance arrangements. As an environmental directive, there are significant differences in how it's implemented and then enforced across each of the 28 member states. We also see the EFTA countries, the European Free Trade Association countries, have their own packaging regulations in force. And we see that packaging regulations in each of the 28 member states do continue to change as new amendment directives and Commission decisions are implemented. We often find that manufacturers simply lack internal resources to be able to understand and then manage different packaging compliance requirements in each EU member state. So with all this in mind, we really do see that there's a compliance risk for companies in not complying with their packaging legal obligations. However, as this webinar will also show today, we're seeing an increasingly significant financial business risk facing companies that may be really paying too much for their packaging compliance. So now what I'd like to do is show you how we are seeing the cost of packaging and recycling increase for harder to recycle packaging. And really that's by taking a closer look at how recent changes in France, Germany and Italy are raising these packaging recycling costs. So firstly, let's take a look at France. Well, in France, a framework law known as Grenelle 1 was adopted in 2009, and under this law, packaging producers must pay a greater share of municipal waste management costs. Under this Grenelle legislation, by 2012, recycling fees needed to take account of the environmental impact and recyclability of packaging. The French packaging decree requires household packaging that manufacturers and importers of household packaged goods must either join a government-approved industry-run packaging compliance scheme, or they have to set up their own deposit scheme or government-approved collection system. Now, as a result of these requirements, perhaps unsurprisingly, most companies in France choose to join an existing government-approved industry-run scheme. And in France, up until this year at least, we had a single packaging compliance scheme in operation known as Eco-Emballage. The Grenelle 2 law, which was published back in 2010, required packaging compliance schemes to charge recycling fees to producers that really encouraged packaging waste prevention. So as a result, since 2012, any producer who improved the environmental performance of their packaging would qualify for a discount on the packaging recycling fee that they have to pay to the packaging scheme Eco-Emballage. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, harder to recycle packaging saw a proportionate increase in packaging recycling fees that had to be paid to Eco-Emballage. So how does this typically work in practice? Well, packaging producers declared the incentives and surcharges, so the increase and reduction in packaging recycling fees which applied to their packaging when they submitted their annual packaging sales data reports to Eco-Emballage. And what this means is that we see a bonus or a reduction of 8% of the total recycling fees for consumer sales packaging, where an on-pack awareness measure is being used, i.e. if the packaging meets certain recyclability standards which are defined by Eco-Emballage. We also see a bonus of the same amount, 4%, granted for an awareness measure that would be used by the packaging producer should they affix a QR code on the packaging which is linked to these standards that are defined by Eco-Emballage. Likewise, we see a 4% reduction on consumer sales packaging fees for any sort of off-pack sorting awareness raising measures which are used by the packaging producer. So that includes the packaging producer making use of posters, press releases, information through digital medium on the importance of packaging recycling. And then finally, we see a bonus of 8% applied to the packaging recycling fees for consumer sales packaging, where processes used on the packaging are done to reduce the environmental impact of that packaging. That includes measures such as removing black carbon dye on outer layers of packaging, which would ordinarily make it increasingly difficult to recycle. Looking at what some of the penalties, so some of the increases are that are placed on these packaging recycling fees. Well, a 50% penalty is added to the packaging recycling fees for any packaging used, which would result in an eventual loss of quality of the final recycling materials. So examples include glass packaging that would use a porcelain or ceramic stopper. So quite often a bottle of wine we'll see have these. Drinks cartons that use paper and cardboard as the majority material, but may contain less than 50% fibres. Reinforced paper and cardboard packaging, and also bottles with PET as the majority material that would also contain aluminium, PVC or silicon. And we see a 100% penalty added to packaging recycling fees for any non-recoverable packaging or packaging that doesn't actually have a recycling channel. So that would include porcelain, ceramics, or plastic bottles that are not PET, HDPE or PP. Okay, so that's the situation in France and where we see this this change in packaging fees dependent on the recyclability of the packaging materials. What are we seeing taking place in Germany now? Well, the new packaging law for Pack G, which has been agreed in draft form at this stage by the German Ministry, is going to be replacing the existing packaging ordinance in Germany known as the Pack VO. The publication of this draft law is expected later this year, and it should be entering into force fully by the end of 2018. Under the new Pack G, producers of sales packaging have to continue to participate in what's known as a dual system, very similar to what's known as a packaging compliance scheme. And they join the dual system to meet their obligation for packaging collection, recovery and reporting. The only exception to this is for manufacturers of packaged professional use products if they decide to operate their own system to take back used sales packaging from business end users. Producers of grouped and transport packaging have to also continue to accept the return packaging for recycling, but unlike for sales packaging, there is no reporting obligation to the regulatory authorities for this type of packaging. And under the Pack G, as per the existing Pack VO regulations in Germany, the packaging producer continues to be defined as anyone who manufactures packaging or packaging materials, and anyone who imports packaging into Germany, as well as distributors of packaging, and this obviously includes anyone who puts into circulation any amount of packaged goods, packaging or packaging materials. The new law for Pack G introduces new recycling targets for sales packaging, and it also specifies that the dual system fees have to be structured, so they must be structured to promote recyclability of the packaging. In addition to this, fees can be structured to promote recycled content and renewable materials which are used in packaging. The dual systems in Germany under the new Pack G regulations will report to a central registration authority on any of the adopted measures that its members take to encourage recyclability with its packaging. And in turn, the authority will develop minimum standards for the recyclability of this packaging. It's also worth highlighting that I have in red here that the fines in Germany are particularly punitive for companies that do not participate in a dual system if classed as a packaging producer. You can see we've got some pretty hefty fines here if you're not compliant to the packaging regulations in Germany and haven't joined a packaging compliance scheme, a dual system. Okay, and finally, in this trio of case studies, let's take a look at how packaging compliance schemes in Italy, in particular the scheme CONAI, are restructuring their recycling fees. Well, in Italy, like in many other member states, the packaging law requires companies that place packaging on that member state market for the first time to take back primary packaging and packaging which has been separately collected by municipalities. All producers in Italy must join the packaging compliance scheme. It's the only scheme in operation currently in Italy, and the only exception to this is if the company themselves has, as a packaging producer, has set up their own system to handle packaging waste. Now, like in most other EU countries as well, the packaging producer pays a packaging recycling fee based on the quantity of packaging they place on the market in Italy. CONAI is now trialling a new fee structure, and it's charging higher fees for harder to recycle plastics. Now, this trial began on the 1st of May this year and is expected to last approximately 6 months. And it is expected to become a permanent measure from 2018 going forwards. The aim of the fees restructuring is to get producers to use more recyclable plastics and also use plastics which can be easily sorted. The flat rate contribution fee, so the recycling fee currently charged by CONAI, is €49 per tonne. Now, the extent of recycling fee variation is due to be published shortly, and we'll expect to see producers who decide to use recyclable plastic packaging benefiting from a reduced recycling fee that they have to pay to CONAI. And conversely, any producer that continues to use a hard-to-recycle plastic in their packaging materials is expected to attract a higher recycling fee. Okay, so we've seen some of the legislative changes taking place in Europe to provide financial incentives for encouraging the use of easier to recycle packaging materials. And how is industry itself responding to improve its packaging recyclability? Well, I'd just like to share a few recent examples with you. So in January this year, company Unilever announced that they plan to make all plastic packaging either fully reusable or recyclable by 2030. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation is now campaigning for wider adoption of circular economy models and has released a new global action plan to lead to the recycling and reuse of 70% of the world's plastic packaging. And finally, the UK retailer giant Marks & Spencer is now working to develop a single recyclable plastic polymer which it will be using across all of its plastic packaging. Okay, so we've seen some of the measures that are causing packaging costs to be increasing for companies. So how does Thinkstep help companies to meet their packaging compliance legal obligations across Europe at the same time providing this to make sure that companies can meet their obligation at lowest cost? Well, our EC4P team assesses your company's legal obligations, and then we can provide robust compliance strategies to manage packaging compliance in all 28 member states and EFTA countries. We can then help your company to implement these recommended packaging compliance arrangements in each country. And this includes calculating your company's packaging recycling obligation in each country, and then recommending the most cost-effective and reliable packaging compliance scheme in each particular member state. And what we do here is calculate and then compare the registration and recycling fees that you would pay by joining a different compliance scheme in each country. So, for example, today we see that there are over 140 packaging recycling schemes in operation across Europe. So we track the fees charged by these schemes and calculate your company's obligation by joining these schemes to provide a recommendation as to which provides the best service at lowest cost. We can then manage the whole process of implementing and maintaining your packaging compliance arrangements. And that includes submitting your producer registrations, joining the packaging compliance scheme, and then reporting equipment sales data and packaging sales data through Thinkstep's web reporting tool EC4P. And we pay the registration and recycling fees on your behalf. And we simply then invoice your company at cost for these fees. We can even identify packaging compliance schemes that overseas manufacturers can join. So in this example, if you, as an overseas manufacturer, you want to provide packaging compliance arrangements for any of your distributors which you use within Europe, we can help you get those arrangements in place. Now, not only do we monitor packaging compliance schemes and their associated fees across Europe, we also track and monitor the WEEE and batteries compliance schemes in operation and what their associated membership and applicable recycling fees are. So we help you choose the most suitable recycling schemes for your products and your sales arrangements. So for example, we only have a handful of compliance schemes across Europe that can provide compliance services for all categories of WEEE, batteries and packaging. And in fact, most compliance schemes can only provide their services for particular types of products, batteries or packaging, and may actually only be limited to covering only WEEE or batteries or packaging. But we track these schemes, we know exactly what products, what types of packaging or batteries that they provide compliance services for, and we can make a recommendation as to which scheme your company should join in each particular country. So with many compliance schemes, it's obviously very difficult for producers to ensure that the compliance scheme that they've joined allows them to meet their legal obligations and to also be sure that it's a cost-effective solution for them in each country that they've joined a scheme. So once we've helped you identify a suitable compliance scheme, we can then manage any ongoing packaging reporting through our web system EC4P. And the EC4P platform, which James will shortly demonstrate, is now being used by manufacturers to gather and manage their ongoing packaging as well as their equipment, electronic equipment and battery sales data. And it's really a system that is used to guarantee their compliance with packaging plus WE and batteries reporting obligations across Europe. We can also audit any existing packaging compliance arrangements which your company may have made in each EU member state. Quite often arrangements that companies have made may have been in place for a number of years. So we can take a look at these to confirm whether these arrangements really are still the most suitable, the most legally robust and the most cost effective for your company. Now, we've been considering the challenge for companies to comply with EU packaging regulations, and what I'd like to do now to further explain this challenge is just use this animation to highlight what some of the main issues are facing manufacturers when they need to understand and then implement packaging producer compliance arrangements across Europe without using some sort of centrally managed compliance solution such as Thinkstep EC4P. So under a typical compliance scenario, a manufacturer's compliance manager will be relying on a sales manager in a particular country, so we're using Sweden in this example, to understand all the relevant packaging obligations under Swedish packaging law, to be able to register as a packaging producer with the correct packaging authorities, to ensure the correct recycling of packaging being sold in Sweden, to report the amount of packaging sold in Sweden to the correct authority in the correct format, and pay the correct packaging recycling fees on time. And they have to then report all this data back to the company's compliance manager. So the compliance manager is happy that the company in Sweden continues to meet its packaging obligations. Now, of course, if the manufacturer starts to sell into more than one EU member state, in this case, they're starting to sell into Germany and Spain, well, then they also have to meet the producer legal requirements under the packaging regulations in these countries. And of course, we've only considered 3 member states. We've got 28 in total, well, currently 28 in total, each with different packaging regulations and with different requirements for packaging compliance. Now, the alternative approach is that manufacturers are increasingly using Thinkstep's EC4P service to consolidate managing their packaging compliance arrangements in all EU member states. In this way, Thinkstep's EC4P team, they'll register your company as a packaging producer in each member state and assist your company to implement packaging collection, recycling and reporting arrangements in each country. The EC4P web reporting system will then collect all the relevant packaging sales data from the nominated sales office in each country and then report the amount of packaging placed on the market in each EU member state to the correct authority in the correct format, through to issuing your company compliance manager with a single compliance report and single packaging recycling invoice. And therefore, this ensures the company's legal compliance across the whole of Europe. Okay, so what I'd like to now do is pass you over to my colleague James Pearson. He's going to be providing you with a demonstration of how EC4P is being used by manufacturers to gather and manage the packaging as well as equipment and battery sales data to be able to manage their compliance with the packaging plus WE and batteries reporting obligations across Europe. Okay, thanks, James.
Okay, thanks Howard, and hello to all the attendees joining today's webinar. As Howard just mentioned, my name is James Pearson. I'm the product manager of Thinkstep's EC4P web-based compliance tool, which Howard actually has just given us a really great introduction to. To follow on from that introduction, I'll be running the second half of today's webinar, which will consist of a guided demonstration of the EC4P web system. And to do that, I'll use an example manufacturing company which sells packaged products into EU member states to help highlight how EC4P and our managed compliance services can be used to really to simplify the packaging compliance process. And of course, as we've seen from Howard's slides, achieving packaging compliance can be a very complicated process indeed. And it can also place quite serious financial as well as administrative burdens on your company if not dealt with in the proper manner. So just to reiterate a few housekeeping notes before I continue. If anyone has any questions during the second half of the webinar, please use the chat function to submit those questions, and Howard and myself will do our best to answer those. At the end, I can see there's quite a few questions that have been coming in during the first half already, so we'll look to answer some of those at the end of the session. And just to mention again that the webinar will be available to watch via our YouTube channel, and if anybody would like a PDF copy of the slides, then please contact Howard and myself and we'll be able to provide those after today's presentation. Okay, so just before switching over to the web browser and starting the demo of EC4P, I'd like to just run through a few slides to give a high-level overview, including some of the benefits of our services and of the EC4P system. So we saw from Howard's packaging compliance case studies that the requirements of EU member state packaging regulations can be really quite complicated, and they're often quite different from country to country. So EC4P gives companies an easier way to take control of packaging as well as WIN batteries compliance by offering a centralized approach to compliance management. Now, the first aspect in delivering this approach is Thinkstep's team of expert compliance consultants. Now, this team can really quickly and accurately assess companies' packaging obligations. And again, as we've seen from Howard's slides, this is dependent on a company's sales arrangements, on the types of packaging which a company is placing on member state markets, as well as in some cases the amount of packaging which that company is selling or placing onto member state markets as well. Our team can then provide cost-effective registration and reporting solutions, as we have really long-standing relationships with the compliance schemes across Europe. We can then manage those memberships going forward, and also help companies ensure they meet all of the associated reporting deadlines for apparent with scheme membership. Thinkstep will then pay the scheme fees, the recycling and membership fees on your company's behalf, and pass those costs through under our invoice. The benefit being, rather than setting up many supplier accounts, a company can just set up a supplier account with Thinkstep, and it really simplifies that process. So the second aspect in delivering our centralized approach is the EC4P software platform itself. So some specific aspects of the EC4P platform before I actually open up the browser and dive into the system. The software displays all upcoming reporting deadlines which are specific to a company in a centralized web dashboard. Now, considering many of these deadlines have different reporting periods and different deadline dates, I hope to show you in just a moment this can be a really valuable management tool. So EC4P will also chase the users made responsible for these deadlines. and it will chase them as those deadlines approach and remind them that they need to enter sales data as those deadlines approach. Once the user has entered data, EC4P will check that the data has been entered in the correct format for that specific member state regulation. EC4P will then issue annual compliance certificates, one on an annual basis one each for packaging compliance and one each as well if a company is using EC4P for WEEE and batteries compliance as well. And we've actually found that these compliance certificates are a really effective way that companies can communicate how they're achieving compliance with any interested parties. So that might be the likes of national authorities, auditors, or your customer base as well. You know, that might be distributors, resellers, or even end users in some case. Okay, so the next slide's really just a quick infographic, and the idea behind this infographic is to show that EC4P can act as a filter to filter out all of the complexity involved with packaging compliance in Europe, and now as well increasingly in other parts of the world as well. Okay, so now that we have a bit of background about the regulations and about the system at a high level, I'll actually move on to the product demo. But just to reiterate, we've set up an example account for a company called Acme Electronics, which is an electronics manufacturer selling products into multiple EU member states and who are using EC4P to achieve packaging compliance in those member states.